I think especially today, with any information, people need to, stop trying to look for this. Get the fuck up. Simon says, get the fuck up. Throw your hands in the sky. All right, the question is, I'd love to hear your opinions on Chad Wesley Smith's video and his views on the West Side conjugate method. I didn't watch the whole thing, so I can't really say definitively, anything on it. I did have a whole lot of people ask me questions about it and send me a lot of messages about it. And this is kind of my takeaway on the whole thing is, even if I did watch it all the way through, I'm not too sure what type of insight I'd really be able to give into it, because as I've mentioned many times before, when I speak about, Louis and West Side training, man, I can only talk about what was going on when I was there. And I was there from 91 to 2005. I'm more than happy, to answer any questions and to discuss anything that was going on during that time frame, because I know what was going on then. I've given seminars on what's going on there. I can speak, about the conjugate system. I can speak about concurrent training. I can speak about all those things, but I can't really speak about what West Side's doing now, because that was over 10 years ago. I mean, I don't have the education nor the authority to really be able to speak on it, because I don't even know where to begin. I would have to sit down with Louis first, to discuss with him what they're currently doing and the changes that they've done. Now, I will say this from when I was there, that I wrote an article, and I do believe it's still on elitefts.com. I'm not 100% sure on this though, because when we did the article migration, we did lose a lot of articles when we changed the website over. But just off of the top of my head, I came up with about 100 different things, significant things that I saw change at West Side when I was there, from the time period that I was talking about for the 14 years I was there. For instance, when I got there, they didn't have a monolift. When I got there, we weren't using chains, we weren't using bands, we weren't even using board presses. It was pretty much just floor presses and pin presses for any max effort work. The max effort work at that period of time we were using had waves, and then we went into, changing it every single week. The squat pendulum wave went from it was a 5-week pendulum wave that we were using, and got taken down to a 3, when I was there. So there was a lot of things that changed in the 14 years that I was there. So I have to look and assume, when answering a question like this, that there's been 11 years since I've been there, and I look at all the things that changed in the decade that I was there, I can't really answer it. Now, skipping through, some of this stuff and some of the things that were pointed out to me, the word phasic came up, that West Side doesn't work in phases. A lot of these things need to be better defined for me to really answer it, because everybody, for instance, people define volume differently. Some people will define workload differently. Some people will define, I got people who define microcycles. Everybody's got different definitions of things that they should actually be pretty solid as far as what they actually mean, but they don't. So, for instance, some people will, with volume, they will calculate what the total workload is, sets times reps times weight. I don't. For me, volume is sets times reps. When you're doing sets times weight times reps, you're speaking more workload, or tonnage, work. that type of thing. That's how I've always defined it. That's how I was always taught. So I can't, when somebody says the West Side is not phasic, I need to know exactly how they define and what they think is phasic, because to me, I would say, well, it is, because all the dynamic effort work was phased. There were 3-week phases when I was there, 3-week phases and 5-week phases. And in the bench manual that I wrote years ago, I think there's 50 different phases or dynamic phases that were there. Now it's concurrent. So the dynamic is your max effort work phases or changes it differently than how the dynamic work would. So the max effort work was changing on 1 to 3 week phases. The dynamic work was changing on 3 to 5 week phases. The accessory work would change. Sometimes the accessory work would stay the same for 5 weeks. Sometimes it would change each week. It was just rather if you broke a record or if you didn't, or how important that movement was for you. But that kind of cycled as well. And when I was there, the sled work cycled too, as far as how the sled dragging was being done. So I think that, the basic, I think a lot of basic premises get lost here with definitions, and that people need to agree on how they're defining what they're defining first before the comparisons can really be made to make sure it's the same. So that's one thing, is there can be, whenever somebody's trying to analyze, break down, critique, or whatever you want to call it, another training program, how they define these different things needs to be really, really specified, especially if they want to break it down into a detailed manner. And I'm not 100% sure, because I didn't watch the whole thing, if that's the case. Once again, I'm going off very limited exposure and what people were sending to me. So the other aspect with that is the concept. Man, I like the concept. I like what they're trying to do as far as looking at different training programs. What I would like to see, and what I think would be really cool, and the reason why I'm answering this is because I really do think it would be cool, and I don't want to go out and do it and then have the fitness community, strength community say, oh, you're just ripping off what Chad did. So I put it out there, and if they want to do it, they can do it. I don't really care, one way or another. But I think that that discussion where you're talking about detailed aspects of the training, you're really only hitting 10% of the people, the listeners and readers who actually really give a shit about that. When you're dealing with the people who are going to be watching and wanting to get stronger and looking for a better program, they just want to know what's a better program and how they define that program and what they're really looking for. And from that aspect, I would survey people first to see what they're looking for in a program, and then use that to be able to be the analytical tools to be able to break down the program. For example, I think most people would be more interested in how many days a week is the program going to take? How much time is each training session going to take? Am I going to have to buy equipment of some sort to be able to do the program? If it's educational equipment, do I need to buy the training manual? Or if it's different bars or different type of training equipment, what is actually required for that? What's the total investment going to be to be able to do the training program? What's the minimal investment that's going to have to be made for the training program? Are there additional educational resources if I need help with the training program? If you're using that training program, is there someplace you can go that you can get answers if you run into a sticking point or you have a question about the program? Can you call somebody and get the answer, or do you have to join a website to get the answer, or do you have to buy a book to get the answer, or Is there a Facebook group that you can get on to get the answer? I think those type of things are what people really want to know before they really get into the program, because dealing with the number of people that I have over the past 18 years, these are the type of questions that I get asked when they ask me questions about, Westside 531 Cube or any other training program. This is what they want to know. It's how much time is it going to take? Do I need to have a training partner? Can I do this in a commercial gym? All those type of things. I think those should be a big part of the variables that are being put out there. It may not be sexy, it may not be as fun, but I think that's irrelevant when it comes to putting content out that you're really trying to help people. I think the end listener needs to kind of be put first. And then if you wanted to put, a back end of the critique where you get into some of the details of certain things, then that's fine. But at least you're covering the basis first of what the end user is really gonna want. Now, I completely, 100% totally apologize if this was covered in the video. I don't know if it was. I don't think so, because that's not the feedback that I'm kind of getting from that. But my thoughts on it, I love the concept. I think the concept's great. I like to see the concept more geared towards the end user. I can't really give my thoughts on the differences between or the critique of any of the specifics of it, because I haven't been there for 10 years. So I don't know what they're doing right now. I kind of know, but I don't know. So that's kind of where I'll leave it. I'm just let's just say I'm impartial to the whole thing. If there's education in there, if there's something that you can learn from in there, then try to find what you can use, with any information. I think especially today, with any information, people need to, stop trying to look for this grand, overreaching answer that's going to solve all your life's problems with one training program. You want to take the information that you're given and disseminate it into what you've already learned and what you already know, and then put it into practice with what you believe that's working best for you, and then apply that. Because, and as a side note to this as well, one thing that can be a little frustrating, and I've been guilty of it as well, you have a lot of people in the strength, powerlifting industry, fitness industry. There's a lot of people that really, really know their shit. And if they all sat in one room, they would realize that they agree on far more than they disagree on. They probably agree on 80 to 90% of everything that they're talking about. And that 10% they disagree on. Well, that 10% everybody likes to see everybody argue about it or whatever it's going to be. That's fine, I understand that. That's not the point that I'm going to make. The point I'm trying to make is there becomes all this perceived infighting and bickering. This person doesn't like this person doesn't like this person. I really don't think any of this has to do with if one person dislikes another person personally. It's a program, or it's a product, or it's a training method, or it could be just somebody's squat or competitive lift, for that matter. It has nothing to do with the actual person. But with all the bickering and perceived, man, I don't want to say the word hatred because that's a terrible word, but the perceived differences in, let's just call it infighting, the perceived infighting, that those people who know their shit, and I'm speaking to you now, the people out there that really know their shit and really are good at what they do, and are the ones who are helping to lead and cut the path in the industry, maybe it's time to, set down the sword, set down the criticism of the other people who are actually getting the work done as well. Because what's happening, guys, and you're not seeing it, is all the people who do know what they're doing and all the people who are good at what they're doing are all caught up in this own little inner battle, so to say. Meanwhile, without even you know what's going on, there's a bunch of dickweeds, on the other side of the fence who are knocking product out left and right, who have no fucking clue what they're doing. They're your internet gurus, or they're everything that all you guys complain about. They're the ones that are knocking books out of the park left and right, making money left and right. They're the ones that are pulling in all the online clients because they're not involved in all this online bullshit. They're marketing product, and they suck at what they do. So you're kind of killing yourselves, and I've been guilty of it as well. So we're kind of killing ourselves, with this infighting, where if we just, realize what's actually going on, and that we're actually cutting our own throats, while everybody else is profiting off everybody else's infighting, then we'll stop and then realize, maybe it's time to start putting out better content, everybody across the board, including myself, put out better content that's going to be able to help the readers more, because it takes the same amount of effort to put out content, to help others than to put out content that can be perceived, is trying to tear somebody else down. And I use the word perceived because a lot of times I think people will put stuff out and it ends up being perceived completely the wrong way. That's not the way it was intended to come out in the first place. It's just the way it was interpreted by people on the other side. So the takeaway from that is, the people who know what you're doing, look at the forest through the trees and see what's really going on, because what you want and what you're trying to do, grow your own businesses, grow your own brand, develop your own product, be able to help more people through your company, and what you do is kind of being stifled. And then the people who really don't know what the fuck they're doing are the ones that are taking all that business from you because you're too wrapped up in the wrong things. And this is not speaking directly to Chad in any way whatsoever. This is across the board. It's an issue with pretty much most of the experts that I see across the board. Most, not all, but a lot. And as I noted, myself included, with things that I've done and have written before in the past as well. So I'm just as guilty as charged. But when you step back and look at the grand scheme of things, I think everybody will agree, that we got a greater purpose here than that. The greater purpose is to help people get better. And if this is what many of us have spent our lives doing, then that's what we need to do, is to help people get better and to step up and start passing on to do that job and do what we were basically all felt we were put here to do. And stop letting that information come from people who don't have a fucking clue what they're talking about. One last thing that I want to say that's kind of related to this, but it really isn't, but it's a good place to be able to put it, and I want to put it out there somewhere, is in regards to the content that Louis has been putting out recently. He's doing podcasts now, and there's articles on his website, and he just released a book on Olympic weightlifting, and he's got some other things in the works. Is the content that he's putting out now, man, I love to see that stuff, because what a lot of you guys are seeing is something that I saw when I was there and was kind of making the rounds with Louis when he was doing the seminars and the consulting, and there were countless seminars that I went with him to and was able to talk about training with him and listen to him to speak to other coaches and be a part of all that dialogue and all that narrative that was just amazing, and And I remember at the time, and I even told him this so many times, because all he ever wrote about was powerlifting. But yet we had coaches in there every weekend. I mean, towards the last 5 or 6 years, I mean, it got to a point where we, you know, it's actually kind of funny. I mean, people like the West Side stories, but, you know, I was having coaches coming in too, but Louis was having most of them come in. And it got to the point where it was actually a little distracting to all of us that were training in there. So Louis would blame the shit on me and say, well, Dave's got these motherfuckers coming in here all the time and, you know, all this kind of stuff. But it wasn't me, it was him. And at the same time, you know, I could be sitting here right now blaming him when it really was me. So you don't know. So only he knows and only I know. But I'll just leave that as a joke between us. But man, the information that he's putting out, guys, you probably really want to start following what he's talking about, because his brain, when it comes to the dissemination of the content and the material and all the people that he's been associated with and has met throughout the years, and the sports scientists, man, we had people from all over the world coming in the gym, and it could still be the same today. Like I said, I don't know. But when he would start to speak to these coaches on what he thought would be great for them to try in their training, it wasn't anything like what we were doing. It was definitely, you know, concurrent training, and it was awesome. And I remember thinking at the time, why in the fuck are you not putting this stuff out? This is gold. You know, and that's why all these coaches kept coming in, because the information that he was providing them with was just pure gold. And at the time, you know, his passion is powerlifting. We all know that. We get that. I mean, there's nobody, there's no duplicate. There'll never be a duplicate of Louis Simmons. It's not going to happen, ever. I don't know if there's another person in this world that's more passionate about powerlifting than he is. And if there is, I'd like to meet him, because I'm really honest to God, I don't think there is. But when it comes to just the overall training aspect and the sport training, the guy knows his shit, man. He's a genius. And it's just, he's never really put the content out. And I'm really happy to see that he's starting to putting a lot of content out and starting to share it with people, so they can see that, you know, there's more to it than just the stuff that we were doing in the gym, you know, as powerlifters. There's a whole hell of a lot more to it. And he did have athletes in there when we were there, but he's got a lot more multi-sport type athletes that are in the gym now than what he had before. So if you're not following and listening to his podcast and some of the content that he's putting out now, I highly recommend you do, because it's not, what he's putting out now isn't all 100% directed towards powerlifting. It's actually more, from what I've heard recently, more directed towards other sport. And that's something that was just astounding for me to hear when I heard it, because it was so different than everything else that was being kind of regurgitated and puked out through everybody else during that time. So, and he's built on that since then. So it's, for me, it's, you know, I'm learning something every single time I listen to the stuff that he's putting out there. So, and I'm not being paid for this. It's not paid content or whatever. And it's not because I trained there for so long. It's because I really do think it's real beneficial for you guys to check it out, because this is something that I've wanted him to do for so long, and now he's finally doing it. So it's great to see that that's finally happening. So I do want to kind of put that little plug in there, because I do think it's important for you guys to check it out, because it will help you. You know, the best specific thing for a beginner or a novice to do is just something like, Dave, you got like 6 weeks of glycogen in your system right now. You know that, so I kind of knew it was going to be a long